Hello and welcome to our third collaborative session. As promised, this will be weeks 7 and 8 that we're going to go over. They have some good things to kind of look at, and one of the main platforms, as we can see from all the instances that are occurring over here nationally, we're going to be looking at social media. So that'll be one of our top areas, and we'll just kind of summarize some of the things that we discussed in our previous sessions, and that'll be it. We'll just keep moving along. Just as a gentle reminder, those of you who signed up for the Columbia Southern University prophecy section, just remember that this has been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. Okay, so we'll be moving forward with that one. Just wanted to lighten the session up just a little bit as we're dealing with some of our lecture here. So basically, what we're looking at now will be a little bit of interactivity, and then we'll look at some areas of co-op or coop, or however you'd like to pronounce it. We'll be dealing with that, community operations, and then we'll be moving forward into social media. Okay, so let's get started and take a look at our community and continuity operations here. When a disaster strikes a community, then the continuity of operations is going to take place. And a plan and a devolution plan is going to ensure that the emergency manager and the emergency management agencies, as well as any organizations and businesses and nonprofit organizations, can continue service to stakeholders with minimal downtime. Now, what does this entail? Well, if the business happens to be destroyed, then you're saying, well, Dr. Mylan, how is that going to occur if the business is not operating? Well, it can be at a different location. It can be at a designated site that the continuity of operations is going to occur. We have to look at our plans. We have to understand that these plans have to be in place, such as the recovery phase. As we all know, the recovery part of our emergency operation plans is not exactly the most exciting piece of the operation plans. We like getting down and dirty and rolling up our sleeves and saying, okay, now we need to do this, and try and get all our supplies and all the people together. But that still involves recovery, and recovery is kind of perhaps a slower process, but one that is very imperative to the community returning to some type of normalcy if they have the opportunity to return to some type of normalcy within a given time. You're going to have a short-term plan as well as a long-term plan. Short-term plans are going to be good, perhaps for a week, perhaps maybe for 15 or 20 days. And anything beyond the 25-day mark, then you're going to have to look at probably a long-term plan if it's going to be exceeding a month. But it's going to depend. Again, like we discussed in the other collaborative sessions, it's going to depend on the type of disasters, depending on the types of the recovery efforts that are going to be out there and the supplies that are going to be there as well. So when we do have a continuity of operations, we need to have everybody working alongside one another, communication, collaboration, being on the same communication page, shall we say, when it's going to be dealing with emergency management and the agencies and the fluidity of the situation that needs to take place in dealing with businesses maintaining their service to stakeholders. And we're going to do this hopefully within a minimal amount of time. In looking at these plans, when an agency is not able to resume normal operations within 30 days after a disaster, that was a little preclude in the past slide, if you didn't notice, but 30 days after a disaster is the business is unable to continue operations, then a devolution or devolution plan is going to be implemented, temporarily transferring primary statutory authority to a secondary authority until the primary authority is able to resume normal operations. How's that for a FEMA definition there? There's a lot of authority going on there. Whether it's going to be primary or secondary, you know there's going to be authority that is going to be taking place. No worries. That's part of that recovery plan. Basically, what all that mumbo jumbo means in the meantime there is that if you have a business, for example, if you're taking a bank, if you have a bank that's going to be in a primary location, now the bank can't function in that primary location. It's going to be passed along to a secondary authority or a secondary location. Doesn't mean the bank is losing power or influence over what they're going to be doing as far as their business is concerned. However, they will be in another location. It's almost like looking for an alternative care site. If the hospital happens to be defunct, or if it happens to be compromised by the disaster, then you have to look for an alternative care site. Much as the same thing is going on with this devolution plan. It's looking at getting another location, a temporary spot for this business to maintain some type of normalcy. In this case, the bank example that I gave you, then it's able to still protect the finances, still able to distribute monetary compensation in certain locations, and still have some type of fluidity with their normal operations. So again, you're having a plan, it's implemented, it's a temporary transfer of statutory authority to a secondary authority, and then it's moving along. So if you could get past the statutory authorities and all the business red tape and all the operations that are there, just remember that it's going from one place to another and it's still going to be operational. That's what we're looking at there, okay? Keeping it short, sweet, and simple. And as promised, here's the continuity of operations plan, or the COOP, as we say. This is developed for an all hazards event and specifically identifying some of the essential duties for the staff members to maintain operations, and then a secondary location to sustain that service to stakeholders. Much as what I mentioned in the previous slide, this is exactly what's going on, continuity. So this plan, this devolution plan, is flexible, designed for specific hazards or worst case scenarios in some instances, like a Katrina or maybe an earthquake that has some magnitude for it. And then it's going to provide guidelines for delegating those operations as well as alternative internal and or external agencies. So again, we're looking at trying to have an all hazards plan and an all hazards event that will definitely take care of the community as well as those businesses that are going to be there. So it's moving from one location to another location, and then it's providing those services to you, the stakeholder, and being able to get your money. For example, what I just mentioned about the bank example in the previous slide. So then this plan is going to be flexible. It's not going to be the end-all, be-all plan to things that are going on around the area. That's not something that it can do, and it's not designed to do something like that. What it's designed to do is be a temporary respite in the event that this bank is not going to be able to function. There's going to be all kind of key players that are involved there in operations, emergency planning, and being able to identify some of those shortcomings perhaps ahead of time. Perhaps they may need to kind of go back and see what's going to be taking place at that time in order to shift things in order to make it work. But this is, again, kind of like an alternative plan. It's kind of like an alternative care site. It's trying to provide the stakeholders an opportunity to have some type of normalcy in the worst case scenarios. A lot of times in these worst case scenarios, it may be in a domed football stadium, for example, that this bank may be established. That's what needs to be done due to the fact that the severity within the streets, maybe the streets are all flooded, the bank has been demolished by a fire, or it's impassable at that time, or no one can get there. The institution also has to work. Electronics nowadays, technology, and being able to identify these circumstances well ahead of time and proper planning are all key elements that are needed, obviously. But being able to function as a business, we can see, is going to be a critical component as far as this COOP is concerned. Now, there are going to be two approaches to emergency devolution. One of the approaches here we're looking at is going to be an internal approach, and then you're going to have an external approach. Unlike the primary and secondary statute to the statute that was giving to the statute that was provided for the statute prior to providing that statute, the other statute that you were thinking of that really wasn't the statute that we wanted to discuss in the previous slides, this is very basic. This is internal and external devolution. Let's take a look at this internal devolution. So the internal devolution plan, what we're dealing with is a situation where an agency is going to transfer that authority to departments, branches, or field offices that already it has control over, meaning that it's not losing the reins of that business. So again, let's go back to that bank example. The internal devolution means that it's going to break away from that main area, that standard bank. Then it's going to be at an alternative location. However, they're still going to be able to promote their own means of sustainability. In other cases, if you have external devolution, well, then you're going to be looking outside the organization, meaning that sustainability is not going to occur from within Standard Bank. This is going to be something outside, and they're going to be a partnership. It may be with the government or local officials, etc. and how to establish and how they're going to run. The majority of the time, you're going to have internal devolution, and this is going to take place in perhaps a little bit minor, less susceptible areas that are going to have major disasters. Like if you have a Cat 5 hurricane, or if you're going to have an F5 tornado, these are probably going to be areas that are going to need more attention than not. So if you have something of a F1 tornado that happens to come through a town, unfortunately, and the bank is demolished in such a way that it can't provide its resources, well, then it might move to an alternative site. However, internally, they're still going to be able to perform due to the fact that they have an opportunity to work alongside one another with their internal people, with the internal technology, and they're going to just kind of give it to other branches. Another example of this would be what we're dealing with in COVID-19. So this bank example again, you have a standard bank. The standard bank locally is going to be with minimal hours. They're going to only have operations from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. and there's not going to be any lobby service. In this instance, maybe a local branch then is going to take over that function. If they're going to be within a few miles, they will be able to take over that function of being able to meet with you face to face. They're going to have the shields, they're going to have the masks and the goggles and probably the hazardous material suits by now, who knows, but they're going to have protection measures in place. However, you will be able to work alongside them and meet with them face to face based on these measures. This is what the internal process is. It's still the same bank. It's still dealing with people. However, the location that you're accustomed to is not providing that service due to COVID-19 restrictions on that particular bank. They're moving it over to a different bank in a different location, and you can deal with your internal services there and meet with those people face to face. That's the principle behind this, in giving you a couple examples. In a major disaster as well as a contemporary virus issue, what we've experienced here probably in the last few months. Some further examples, just in case you didn't have enough from the previous slide. I'll give you a little bit more just in case, just to make sure that you understand this. So if the building is in one location that incurs that incident and deems the building inaccessible for a brief time, then the customers are going to be directed to conduct their business at the other branch. That's exactly what I was just telling you regarding the bank being damaged or the bank being compromised during COVID-19. So there you go. That's the follow-up to that. Another example is going to be local or state emergency operations, EOC. If a disaster strikes and it destroys the building, then the EOC will be temporarily moved to a designated alternate building, much like anything else that's going to happen in a disaster, whether it's going to be an alternative care site that is needed for the public health department, the hospital, or in this case, a business. That's what is going to be taking place, an alternative care site, your emergency operations center. There's nothing saying that it can't be moved. Hence, I will give you a personal example. Our hospital back in 2007 flooded, and we had our emergency operations center. Our emergency operations center was located on the ground floor. Once the water started coming in, alert, we had to move. We moved up to the second floor. Well, we moved up to the second floor, a nice boardroom area in there. However, one of the situations that you have to realize is that if your electrical equipment happens to be in the basement, and water cascades down the elevator shafts and it goes into the basement area where your electric is, water and electric, not a good thing. They don't mix, and that's what happens. Electricity goes out, so all of a sudden you hear the power go, and then everything fades to black. So you have an issue again. So then we relocated our emergency operations center a third time, which happened to be in a further part on the south side of our hospital, up on a little bit of a hill to where it was away from the water, that was away from the main area of the power grid. That section of the hospital just so happened to be working at that time. Our emergency operations center was moved over there for a third time. My point being, I think you get it now, is that it's not going to be, okay, we're going to stay here. This is our end all be all to this situation, and we're not going to have to deal with it because this is what we planned for. Whatever you plan for, you might as well start planning for the second and third backup, because there's going to be issues regardless of how well you may have thought something out. Something always is going to change. Again, much like I mentioned in the previous lectures, that this is a situation that's going to be fluid. A disaster is just that way. It's nice to have policy. It's great to have procedure. I love having it. It's there. It's good to have it for legal nature as well as something that's going to be a quick remedy to a situation that's going on. But you, as the leader or emergency manager in charge of that overall operation, you're going to need to think on your feet. And sometimes those rules and policies, you're not going to be able to use them because there's not going to be that obvious attempt that's going to be made for you to utilize that stuff, because the situation is going to be different. It's not going to say, okay, now you could turn to page 33A subset 1 and this is how you perform this. That's not not going to be the issue. You might have time later on when things start to maybe settle down or there's a lull in the action that normally takes place. But during those first few moments and trying to get things organized within the first 30 to 45 minutes of your disaster operation, those are going to be critical times, and you're not going to have the time to thumb through and realize that that's not going to be there, or the berm breaking and water flowing through your hospital and fish swimming around in your gift shop. That wasn't written in the policy on how to deal with that. There are no lures, there are no rubber worms or anything to go and get that. You need to deal with it afterwards when they're draining or when they're going through recovery efforts, et cetera, et cetera. That's part of it. So again, the devolution examples that we have here, you're using the bank, you're moving from one place to another. The customers then are going to conduct their business at another location or another branch. Much is the same with your EOC, Emergency Operations Center, that you're going to be temporarily and respectfully disturbed by that disaster, and then you're going to move to another location. That's the whole point behind devolution. And again, moving the EOC, that one's going to be a little bit more internal rather than external, but it depends on the type of disaster. If you're doing a unified command approach, that is going to be a whole different ball game, and that's going to be external operations or an external devolution system. So your local planning. So now you have your COOP or your co-op and devolution plan. They're developed. Well, so it's important that we're all on the same page and we know what's going on, so that the lead agency is going to be able to perhaps conduct what's going on there in the field, or in this situation, taking a look at what we discussed in our previous lecture, tabletop exercise for primary and secondary agencies to discuss some of the roles and the responsibilities that are going to be associated with this local planning, as well as this devolution plan in response to an all hazards and a specific hazards approach. It will depend on what you're going to be dealing with. Your people that are in the field probably are going to say, hey, we need this, we need to work on certain circumstances. What about evacuation? Do we have evacuation routes? Do we have alternative care, et cetera? You will develop that working relationship with your other jurisdictions that are going to be sitting around the table with you. And they need to understand that this is going to be an all hazards plan, or is this going to be a specific hazards plan? The other thing then, understand that likewise, this is going to trigger a devolution plan that can be discussed, the delegation of authority, and then the orders of succession. Much like any emergency operations plan, or even within our federal government, you do have the opportunity there saying, if this occurs, then this next person is in charge. This occurs, this next person is in charge. You normally want to be 5 to 6 people deep. This way, in case, God forbid, something does happen to the main area of a unified command that they can't get there, or they lose communications, and you do have 2 or 3 other people that are there in succession, then they're able to take over and see what they have. So again, it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of community planning, as well as stakeholder buy-in, not only internally but externally out there. Political officials are definitely included in this, in being able to have stakeholder buy-in. Perhaps you can have one of them attend, maybe based on their schedules, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just to get an idea of the importance of what's going on. It doesn't take much, but it does take much to pick up that phone. Sometimes that phone is like a lead weight because there's so many no's that are involved. Not everyone's going to say yes. You may be compassionate about this devolution plan or the co-op that's involved, but it might not take place with all the key players that are involved. Trying to get everybody organized for one circumstance, one situation, and one date and time, good luck. Not everybody's going to be able to make it. However, they have these people that are called representatives. or people that'll work alongside and take over just in case. So maybe they can send somebody else. They can take notes, they can participate, and they get it back to their lead person, and you work from there. There's ways around all this stuff. But again, you're going to have to be creative. And again, it's not going to be an easy task. No local planning measure is going to be easy unless you have the opportunity to sit down and say, what do we need to do? And make it all inclusive. So this way, no one feels like they're left out. What do you think of that? How do we go about doing this? You brought up a good point in our last tabletop exercise that I remember. Take copious notes. Make sure that the people that are there are, one, on the same page with this, two, have social input, and three, are ready, willing, and able to work alongside everyone there in an effort to have life safety within that community. Again, this is very important ahead of time, and it's going to take months perhaps to plan a tabletop exercise, and it might even take a year for a full-scale exercise. It's been probably done in less time, but if you really want to be successful and you really want to get things out of it, and if it's well orchestrated, then you'll get the most out of your after-action report. Yes, social media. What would be anything from emergency management now without social media? Well, the access of social media and the public has made it personal, and social internet websites are accessible almost to everyone in real time. And don't fool yourself that this is not going to be out on any type of YouTube or out on Facebook or whatever it may be. It's going to get out there very quickly. We can oftentimes see that it's out on social media prior to the press even getting it anymore. The press used to be the ones now breaking this story. Your friends are breaking the story. They have their phones. They have video. They're able to take a look at what's happening. And it may be a situation where you're rumbling, bumbling, fumbling, stumbling around. And believe me, those are going to be some of the issues that are going to be out there on media. Look what's happening here. They don't know what they're doing, et cetera. So you have to be careful. You have to be prepared, and you have to be organized in this day and age with all the advents of social media and cameras, their videos and things on phones. It just makes it very, very easy to kind of edit and distort a lot of things and factual information out there. So be careful, and you never know who's out there listening to you when you're on. Some people, either do it for malicious intent, either leave the phone on in a different location, or it might be an accident because you're so enthralled by the situation, and we do forget. Microphones are left on. How many times have you seen that in press conferences where microphones have been left on? And there have been a few colorful metaphors that were said and picked up on by that microphone. So yeah, you do have to be careful. So during the day or night, users are able to access the internet through the mobile service. They're able to communicate. They access the information, the websites, and also being able to interact by voice or text messages. Twitter, Parley, and all these other things that are out there, they're good sources of information. However, propaganda obviously does exist out there, and it's a more expression than anything else. However, in a situation that you need, and if technology happens to fail, if the phone center or messaging center happens to go down, you still have a connection to satellite. Well, there you go. And this might be one of the ways to go. And it might have to be practiced, and people are going to have to be well versed in it. It has to be documented, et cetera. And you have to be careful, because if it does go out on social media, that is a obvious social platform. This thing is going to be out there forever, and whatever information that you're transcending at that moment, it goes out there. It's going to be out there for other people to look at and kind of critique and pick apart at a later time. So keep that in mind. And then the affordability of many social media tools out there. The emergency manager then has to ponder which one is going to be good, which one is going to be bad. YouTube is great. Again, everybody has access to it. However, with the privacy settings that you do have there, that will be helpful in limiting the amounts of views that you can get on YouTube. It'll just depend. But if you have a group or a team, you might have to get a certain password, or you might have to get a certain code or something that only the team members are going to get, and being able to get that information to you. So keep in mind that social media is out there. It is a big advocate for either promoting or demoting your situation, and it can be beneficial to assist the press, and it can be beneficial in determining some of the moves and the location. If they have to be in a different location and they're sending you this video, hey, this is where we are. This is what's happening. We have road closures. We have trees down. We have flooding in the streets, etc. Can you send help over here? That's one good way. On the other hand, there may be a lot of things that you're trying to get your act together. You don't have proper supplies, and people will find out about that too. Again, pros and cons to social media. In many disasters, then you're going to have cell towers that are going to be damaged. Some of the areas that prevent the use of these communications, those are going to be impacted, but they can be used prior to the disaster to kind of warn citizens and then provide them with any type of instructions or evacuation that needs to be done. So you can send out a message, much as we see with these Amber Alerts. The same thing can be done locally with your emergency managers and emergency situations if you subscribe to them. If you have the opportunity to, I would highly suggest that. It gives you an opportunity to see what type of weather is coming, what type of events need to be paid attention to, as well as if you're going to need to take cover or if you're needing to be evacuating your area. And then emergency managers should review their communications plan and evaluate the use of social media. This is, again, a no-brainer here, but a lot of times that falls off to the wayside. And how many times in each and every exercise and each and every event that we have, the first thing to go is communications, of course. And it's due to a lack of reviewing those communications and seeing what other options are going to be made available. So pay attention to that. At least every 6 months, do that. I used to do it every 3 months to make sure that I still had the names, faces, places, and phone numbers that were there before, and then updating the list as necessary. It's easier to revise a page rather than revise an entire working operations plan based on social media, because you haven't done it for months or even years on end, blowing the dust off the cover when the event finally does take place, and you go, oh, well, this was updated in 2005. So keep in mind, there might be times that you're going to have to go the extra mile, might be after work or whatever, but make sure that media plan is up to date and you do have the correct information. And then likewise, nonprofit organizations can implement their social media plan into their network and identify some of the areas where people will be needed, the food, the shelter, and some of the evacuation and response phases that may need to take place. Again, going back to the previous lecture that we had, we see the importance of nonprofit organizations and being able to work alongside them. Have them sit at the table. Have them work alongside you in creating that recovery plan or in response plan, whatever it may be, because they have numerous resources. They have ample talent that is there to utilize during these times, and even after the event has taken place in the recovery phase, when homes are being rebuilt, when mobile homes and things need to be rebuilt, or if there's going to be schools that are going to be constructed, etc. They have resources, and they'll be very good at being able to provide you with ample resources. Again, understand that things are going to happen. Don't rely solely on cell towers. Remember that these things can go down. Have some type of alternate plan in regards to your communications, whether it's going to be a satellite system, or if it's going to be a different type of computer system, or if it's going to be just something simple to where you can activate it with those cards and being able to communicate. Let's try that one again. Emergency managers, there we go. Emergency managers then need to look at their communications plans and then see what needs to be updated there. And again, remember your nonprofit organizations in an effort to promote more resources in order to promote more collaboration, and then have them sit at the table with you and being able to work alongside you and saying, yeah, okay, we can do this at the tabletop exercise and figure out where our resources will be best utilized during an event. So the emergency manager can use these social media services and then disseminate that information. That's the good portion of your social media, being able to get the information out, let people know what's going on and how things are going to be handed down in the upcoming moments. And it's good too, because some people that have the ability to look on social media, then they can say, hey, we need to evacuate, or what they're telling us to shelter in place, and this is what's going on, more information to come. That's the positive aspect of social media. And then multiple groups of of people that have subscribed to these social media network services, then they can use it on their mobile device, and then they can spread that information out as well. Again, you have to be careful what you put out there because it can work against you, definitely in a negative connotation. Should this disaster get out of control, which can happen at times. Then the emergency manager can receive a report on Facebook, view the supporting documents or a video from camera and pictures within minutes of the occurrence. So Facebook is another good means of looking at things. However, I would highly suggest this would be one of the last things that you want to do in the event that technology is going to fail, cell towers fail, your computer systems are down, etc. In order to perhaps utilize Facebook or Twitter. Again, they're good social media platforms to get the message out to several people, if not thousands of people that have that social media app or have availability to it. But again, it's not going to reach each and every person. Again, this information out there is going to be permanent, and you do have to be careful as to what you're going to communicate to people, because then the news media also has Twitter. So keep that in mind. The news media also has Facebook. So keep that in mind when you're trying to get a warning out, or if you're having some issues that need to be addressed prior to having the media show up and then having discover it for themselves. In looking at social media a little bit further, now we're looking at evacuation. I made that mention of evacuation routes just a little bit earlier in one of the previous slides. Evacuation routes with information, and then being able to give directions and roadway changes and anything that can also help the citizens choose the correct evacuation route. That's going to be helpful. And then the nonprofit organizations then can help as well in dealing with sheltering as well as other facilities, and then for how the citizens can evacuate. Again, nonprofit organizations are out there. They can help direct traffic. They can go out there and provide foodstuffs. They can help set up alternative care sites, et cetera, et cetera. So remember to use social media in the positive light for doing those things, as well as those NPOs. And then, of course, the continual sharing of real-time information is ensuring that everybody that's involved in the emergency operations is going to be able to collaborate, get the message out to the public, and then being able to plan without a delayed time span. Things change. Every 2 seconds, like I said, something's going to change in that disaster. And you're going to have to be prepared for it. If it's going to be dealing with food, if it's going to be dealing with evacuation, or if it's going to be the need for more alternative care sites, whatever it may be, we can see here in COVID-19 that things are very different. Things are very unique. When we feel that one hotspot has been extinguished, there's another one popping up. In another location, they may need ventilators, and the other location has an abundance of ventilators. So they might be shifting and moving supplies and that. And this is where social media comes into play too. Being able to get your word out saying, hey, we need help. That's one way of getting the word out, through social media. But again, there has to be strict policies that are going to be in place, because again, that can make an impact upon, for example, the hospital. It can make an impact upon the organization that's having issues with this disaster, or a community. So you have to be very careful, because some of the things that you put out there then can come back to haunt you later on, not only in regards to community and life safety, but also in legal action as well. And in looking at our social media plans, the information received from social media services must be monitored and then used by the emergency manager in order to augment that information. And then also those agencies that are going to be responding, those also need to be on the same page, no pun intended. But you need to look at what's being put out there as a message. You need to work alongside the other agencies and say, hey, don't put this out there. Don't say anything that we might regret later on down the line. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, as well as in the previous slide, regarding your communications and your communication plan. So finally here, in looking, the emergency manager is going to evaluate the risks to the community, then determine the potential hazards that are going to be there that can destroy cellular towers, for example, and that are going to be used to transmit social media. It's not going to be an easy task, because you have to think about the backup to the backup to the backup plan. As I always say, having 3 or 4 forms of communication is good. I can recall when social media was first becoming popular, when I was in charge of emergency management at the hospital, We were dealing with social media, and then we were also dealing with the cellular, and then we were dealing with, I believe it was IHETS, where we were able to transmit out to a satellite in space, and then being able to have first priority for communications based on a card that we used to have and carry with us. It was only used in emergency times, of course, but we did have that option in getting first priority phone service over anyone else that was out there. Again, and then the very basics, going back to ham radio. And ham radio is very powerful. Ham radio can reach across the planet depending on the frequency, and you can get a message out there as well. The ham radio operators are very few and far between nowadays due to the advancements in technology. But I can't emphasize this enough. As I used to teach my hospital staff, said if your cell phone fails or if you run out of battery power, now what do you have? Ham radio works very well because you can take that. It's portable. You put it up on the hood of a car or another location somewhere nearby, and you can communicate. It lasts a long time. Battery power is a lot better that way, and it reaches even further. And you're not going to have many of these skips and misses and things and dissemination of information that's going to be compromised with ham radio as much as you would with a regular phone out there. So keep that in mind. Have a good backup plan being able to transmit this out, whether it's going to be something that's beaming off of a satellite that's going to be above and beyond cell towers, or if it's going to be dealing with something very basic that has ham radio written all over it and people that know how to operate it. Make sure that's in your backup plan. Again, basics, because if your computer dies, you're not typing anymore. You're actually doing something called writing. Yes, you'll have to write that information down. I know. What a way to end the presentation, right, Dr. Milan? Shocking me to death that I'm actually going to have to pick up a pen and paper and write on it. How dare you? But no, this is what happens. You do still have to jot notes down and be aware that the basics are going to come into play immediately when technology fails. But social media is good when it works, used properly in a positive manner, and then being able to get the word out to the masses. If not, then these backup plans need to be in consideration. And finally here, wrapping up the social media and our collaborative session, then the combined efforts here of various modes, communication, this is ensuring that all citizens in the community then are being able to receive emergency information. I touched on that a little bit earlier. And then as emergency managers, you need to evaluate that communication plan. You have to go out and then see what is being made available, whether it's going to be the supplies from a nonprofit organization, or if it's going to be different types of modes of communication that are going to be utilized there. We must be evaluated and then implemented to ensure that that communication plan between emergency management agencies as well as the public then can be disseminated in a positive manner. It does take time, it does take finances as well as training and education, but it also has to be implemented every once in a while. So I'm sure you're well aware of all the tests and things that go on perhaps a Saturday morning at noontime, where the sirens might go off. It's a test. It goes out there so this way people know that they're there and that this system is going to be working. It might be something simple as putting out one of those emergency management messages that really scare you and get your heart rate up with that weird sound that goes and then it has that scrolling thing at the bottom. It goes, "This is an alert of the emergency broadcast system. We're testing all our areas now." That gets your heart and adrenaline running, and as irritating as that sound is, it still gets my attention. As many times as I've seen it and heard it and gone over it, it's still eerie, it's still irritating, and it still gets my attention. As long as they have this nice four-letter word up there that says test, I'm good. If not, then I'm starting to worry when they start having red screens and flashing and say, "Take cover now, tornado coming, take that cover now." Been there, done that, and yeah, so these are the types of things you need to consider too if you're in an emergency management role. Understanding that sometimes these things need to be tested. Is it timely? Yes. Does it need to be done? Yes. Will stakeholders and the community thank you later on down the line? Hopefully so. More often than not, yes. Hey, thanks for putting that out there. We see it every Tuesday, or it comes out on Thursday sometimes, etc. As long as it's out there and as long as it's being tested, minimum, I mean, at least one time a week, that is going above and beyond the call. So keep those little tips in mind as you're working through your plans and such. So with that, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for not only attending these collaborative sessions, but also being members in the class. You're on your way to receiving your master's, and it's a great step forward in a positive direction. Go out there and make a positive social change, make a difference in people's lives, especially the community, because the community's lives as well as your own depend on some of the decisions that you're going to be making, whether it's going to be working with other agencies, other jurisdictions, and social media platforms, different types of communications, whatever it may be. You being the leader, that is going to determine probably the outcome of how that disaster is going to take place. You will be in compromising situations, no doubt, and not everything's going to be textbook material. However, you can use a lot of things that either your colleagues have discussed here in this class, or perhaps some of the things that you've learned through our readings here, and make them applicable to a real life situation. And say, I learned that. Where did I see that? What do I remember from that? And it'll generate some thoughts and ideas, not only from the class, but perhaps from some of the lectures that we have here. It's not always going to be a perfect scenario, and not everything is always going to work out the way we planned it. It's just not. That's the nature of a disaster. That's the nature of life in general. However, making the effort to do so will minimize some of the scary situations that do arise, and it can minimize some of the unfortunate circumstances that will arise with disasters. Just remember, when you're leading, to lead by example. Always remember that the people around you are there to support you, and that you need to come together as a unit. If you don't have a unified approach, then disaster is going to be just that. It's going to be a disaster. Try and keep an open mind, try and remain calm, and also if you're going to be out there for a long extended period of time, make sure that you're able to hand the baton over to someone else and take a rest, even if it's for an hour and a half or 2 hours, just to get the tiredness out of you so you can think again. A tired commander is one that's not going to function very well, and that's when the mistakes are going to happen. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the class. I do wish you all the best of luck in your upcoming classes and your upcoming occupational endeavors, should our paths not cross. It's been a pleasure working alongside each and every one of you. And I do wish you a good day. And thanks again, once again, for attending the session, as well as being a member of the CSU family here.